cancellation, performance, and concession clauses. Barbara or Lisa, do one of you want to start on that?
I'll start this one. As Barbara's saying, clean and smart, I'll also add fair. So you can't ask for the moon and stars and give nothing in return. So hotels are always willing to negotiate cancellation clauses, and you should do that. It's not just based on what the hotel wants to have. It also should be based on your event and your meeting. So if making a cancellation decision for you is important 8 months out instead of 6 months out, maybe you want to negotiate those dates to be different based upon when you're going to be making your business decisions. Performance, as I said earlier, I'm seeing more and more examples where there are opportunities to reduce the room block as you see how the market is adjusting, or room block reviews. Again, you have to be very clear about whether or not that requires you to pay or not pay if you reduce the room block or reduce it by more than the allotment. Concession clauses are a big issue for me anyway. I see these concession clauses where groups want all these concessions and then they want a lowest rate clause in the hotel. Now, I don't think we really have to worry about lowest rate clauses anymore because of the rate pressure that there is. It's going to be very unlikely that there's going to be a lower rate in the hotel over your event dates. But the point is, if there is a lower rate, those lower rated rooms don't get those concessions in the contract. And so it's not fair. Aside from the fact that it's not legally required to give the lowest rate, it's not fair to say, I want $100,000 worth of concessions, but I also want whatever the lowest rate in the house is. So that's one of the big things I'm seeing a lot in the industry is that push and pull. And again, as I said, I don't think it's going to come into play very much because of the rate pressure in the industry. But as we all know, nothing lasts forever. And so that's something that you have to negotiate clearly. Barbara, what do you think?
Yeah, Lisa, so, to the point about the concessions, I understand and agree. The big thing I'm seeing are the fact that the concessions are tied to picking up a certain percent of the room block. And while I understand that conceptually, if the group is going to either put heads in beds or write a check for attrition fees, they shouldn't lose concessions. And so I really put on the radar screen language, which essentially, the adage is don't ever let somebody do something to you without your consent. And that said, is if the hotel has the right to pull those concessions out or charge for those, that's not a good thing. So at a minimum, if concessions are going to be tied to pickup, then they need to be adjusted, if they are to be adjusted, based on the mutual agreement of the parties. Again, there might be things group is willing to take out or toss out if needed. So I really put that on the radar screen. Almost universally now I'm seeing that in contracts, whereas previous to that I might have seen it, half the contracts or less. So tied to concessions, tied to pickup. Again, I understand why. I make the same argument. I know the head in the bed is spending more money on site at the hotel than writing the check for that room. But at the end of the day, I think that it really goes back to, did the group really fulfill the block? And I think that's the key aspect there. Speaking of that, performance attrition, as you mentioned, Lisa, important certainly there. I talked about room block review dates. I agree. I think that's a strategy that's universally good for both parties. Clients will always ask me, how do I maximize that room block review? And I make sure internally for the groups, you're calendaring these important review dates across a lot of sectors within your organization so that you're not missing these opportunities to release the block if you need to or adjust it. And sometimes from the group's perspective, having the ability to unilaterally reduce the block ahead of time can be helpful. But again, that's going to be something that you're negotiating. Daily versus cumulative attrition. Again, I'd say that was more the exception than the rule. Not saying it's the rule now, but it's definitely that the percentage of contracts that I'm seeing that in is going up. Remember, daily, per day, watch out for that. And really what it means, the impact is that, if you slip in your block on one night, you'll pay fees on that one night, even if on the other night you exceeded your block, and those would offset each other in a cumulative calculation. So being careful about that is key. And then certainly I can't agree with you more, Lisa, on cancellation. As we talk about different things like force majeure, not all paths lead to, getting out of a contract without paying a cancellation fee. So thinking about it as a business, thinking about the timeframes. If you had to make a business decision not to have the meeting, as many groups had to do over the last 2 years, and even on the path forward, looking at the go, no go date, as Lisa gave the example, great one of, if that's 8 months out, make sure that 8 months is within a cancellation fee that you can live with. I'm also seeing a little bit more contracts, a few more, I should say, contracts that have mutual cancellation fees. So either hotel cancels, group cancels, they pay the fee. I don't like them. I don't think they're enforceable. The damages, you have to say it's a reasonable estimate. If a group gets kicked to the curb 60 days out, I can't tell the client whether that dollar amount is going to be enough for them to go shop and find a new location. So Lisa, I think that's one thing you and I have agreed on over the years, realizing obviously the devil's in the details with regard to calculating numbers. And actually one last point on that in the calculating numbers, a drafting mistake we often see is you'll see a cancellation fee schedule. It will have a percentage of room revenue, for example, and then it will have a dollar amount. And sometimes those two don't correlate with one another. And if the group has the ability to reduce the block, as it might, cancellation, is that factored in to the cancellation fee? What I'm seeing now, I would almost prefer that groups would use a percentage approach throughout as opposed to calculating dollar amounts. And that's definitely a sea shift from where I was previous to that. But it's and I'm going to use this term, and this please, no offense to anyone. You have to idiot proof the contract. And what I mean by that is if you go and amend your block later and you forget to amend certain provisions that don't go along with that, you could be stuck with a dollar amount cancellation fee that doesn't correlate with your block. And so just in that way, thinking through percentages and making sure, again, there's the flexibility, if you will, in the terms. Lisa, whether you agree with me on that point or not, but I think that's been something that I've seen evolve over time. And I do think that groups should think about that, hotels obviously too, being consistent, whether it's cancellation or attrition, but usually it's in the cancellation fee schedule. We'll see both a percentage and a dollar amount. And yet there isn't necessarily that flexibility that might need to be there.
Well, let me say a few things about what Barbara said. The first, and I can't say this more strongly, mutual cancellation clauses should not be used, period. I don't think they're ever going to be legally enforceable because the damages that the customer suffers if the hotel cancels it have nothing to do with the damages that the hotel suffers if the group cancels. They're completely unrelated. And so a mutual cancellation clause is just wrong. And I've even seen it in cases where the cancellation clause reduces for resale. What difference does it make to the group if the hotel resells the room? The group's out the money for having to move. It's just crazy. So never, ever, ever do mutual cancellation clauses. In terms of daily attrition, I agree with Barbara. I don't like daily attrition. And I know I'm going to have clients on this call saying, why do you say that? But to me, if you don't pick up Wednesday, but you pick up more on Thursday, you should get credit for that. That's what I think. I think it should be cumulative over the length of the program because you're making a revenue commitment. And whether you hit that revenue commitment on Wednesday or Thursday, to me, shouldn't matter. The hotel's getting the benefit of that contract. And now I've probably got fired by 5 more. In terms of percentages and dollars, back when I started 100 years ago representing hotels, they would only have percentages because they didn't want to frighten their customers with dollar amounts. They now put dollar amounts in because they want them to know this is a real commitment. And I can't tell you how many times I'll have a group say, I can't afford to pay those damages. And I say, it's right there in your contract. You contractually agreed you would pay this amount. Why did you agree to that if you don't have that money? So I think that that's why they want to put that dollar amount in so that everybody knows up front, this is what your obligation is. And Barbara has the argument, well, if you're allowed to reduce your room block, those cancellation damages should be reduced as well. I certainly disagree with that. My position is allowing you to reduce your room block is a concession, just like 1 per 50, and now everybody says 1 per 40 comps, or suite upgrades, or all those other things. We don't give you those concessions if you cancel, and we don't give you the reduced room block if you cancel. That's the argument that we make. you certainly can negotiate that. If Barbara, is representing you and negotiates that, you can. But that's the standard thinking as to why we don't reduce it. That's my thoughts.
Very fair point. All right, to keep it moving, we're going to head to the next